Top 10 Incredible Survival Stories from the Titanic. But before we continue, if you are new in this group, follow my Facebook page and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just click the link and share to your friends. Top 10 Incredible Survival Stories from the Titanic. RMS Titanic was capable of carrying up to 2,435 passengers and 900 crew members. If the lifeboats were loaded to their full capacity, it would have been enough to accommodate 1/3 of the people aboard the luxurious liner. Tragically, there were many seats that sat empty as the lifeboats departed from the sinking vessel, which led to an unnecessary loss of life. Despite the treacherous conditions in the North Atlantic Ocean, many passengers and crew managed to survive the sinking of the world-famous ship. Read the following 10 incredible survival stories from RMS Titanic. 10. Charles Joughin. Charles Joughin was 30 years old when he served as chief baker on RMS Titanic, earning a monthly wage of £12, which resulted in him being one of the best-paid crew members aboard the liner. When RMS Titanic collided with an iceberg at 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912, he was off duty in his bunk, but soon ordered for his bakers to send 50 loaves of bread to the lifeboats, before enjoying some liquor in his room. When he arrived at the boat deck, he was assigned to Lifeboat 10 to escort women and children from the sinking vessel. However, he refused a seat in the boat and returned to his room once again to enjoy a drop more liquor. Once he returned to the boat deck, every lifeboat had gone and he began helping passengers and crew to throw deck chairs overboard into the freezing North Atlantic Ocean. As the ship began to descend into the water, Charles claimed he swam away from the sinking vessel. It is widely believed the liquor helped Joughin to remain calm during the disaster and decreased feeling in his body when he struck the icy cold water. While many people often died within a few minutes of entering the water, Joughin reportedly spent 2 hours floating in the darkness and then climbed onto an overturned lifeboat. He was eventually rescued by RMS Carpathia and later testified, "I was all right barring my feet, they were swelled." 9. Charles Herbert Lightoller. Second Officer Charles Herbert Lightoller was on duty from 6 p.m. until 10 p.m. on the night of the sinking. Before being relieved of his watch by First Officer Murdoch, he instructed for Sixth Officer Moody to call the crow's nest to request the men keep a lookout for small ice and to pass word to other watches. Falling asleep in his cabin, Lightoller was awakened at 11:40 p.m. by a grinding vibration and headed to the deck in his pajamas. After talking to Third Officer Herbert Pittman, who had also been disturbed by the collision, both men concluded the ship must have struck something in the water. Lightoller returned to his cabin to quickly dress and soon convinced Captain Edward J. Smith to lower the lifeboats, as he had been involved in various shipwrecks during his seafaring career. He then assisted women and children into the boats and even used an empty gun to threaten a group of men who attempted to take over Lifeboat 2. Lightoller was also ordered by First Officer Wild to escape the ship on Lifeboat 2, but replied, "Not damn likely," and instead chose to remove Collapsible B, despite the waters starting to rise onto the deck. However, when RMS Titanic plunged forward, he dived into the sea and was forced to swim clear, but was almost sucked down with the ship by the grating of the large ventilator shafts. Fortunately, the water hit the still, hot boiler, which blasted Lightoller back to the surface and he quickly climbed onto the nearby Collapsible B, which he had previously removed from the Titanic before it went under. However, he experienced another near miss, as a forward funnel broke free from the Titanic and narrowly missed him. As Collapsible B eventually gained many survivors, it started to slowly sink and he ended up making his way into Lifeboat 12. When RMS Carpathia arrived to rescue survivors, Lightoller refused to enter the ship until every passenger and crew member were safe, making him the last survivor to be rescued. 8. Richard Williams Norris. Richard Williams Norris, who was an accomplished tennis player from Geneva, Switzerland, was traveling on RMS Titanic with his father, Charles Dwayne Williams. Richard was planning to participate in a tennis tournament in America before studying at Harvard University. Following the liner's collision with an iceberg, the men made no attempt to escape the floundering ship and instead retired to the gymnasium to talk to instructor Macaulay and other passengers. When the ship descended into the ocean, both Richard and his father were forced to swim for their lives. Tragically, the tennis star watched as his father and others in the water were crushed by a forward funnel that had collapsed into the water. However, the wave from the funnel pushed Richard forward and toward collapsible A, which he held onto until he was helped into lifeboat 14. Despite sustaining injuries to his legs, Richard went on to become the United States singles champion in 1914 and 1916, a 1920 Wimbledon men's double champion, and a 1924 Olympic gold medalist. 7. Harold Bride. 5. Ella White. Ella White was a first-class passenger who boarded RMS Titanic at Cherbourg, France, and was accompanied by her companion, Marie Grice Young, as well as her maid, Amelia Bisset, and manservant, Sante Ringini. Despite the exceptional amenities on board the liner, such as the Olympic dining room and state-of-the-art gym, Ella remained in the cabin she shared with Marie throughout the voyage. She only left it when disturbed by the ship's collision, which she later described as if it had traveled over 1,000 marbles. Soon after, she entered Lifeboat 8 with her maid. Despite clashing with the seamen on the ship, it was Ella's battery-operated cane that helped to guide the lifeboat to safety, which she typically used to help her maintain her balance. She reportedly held the cane high to illuminate the pitch-black sky, and it also helped them to appear as a floating lighthouse in the North Atlantic Ocean. The cane also helped to safely guide the lifeboat toward RMS Titanic in search of survivors in the water. While the gadget might fail to impress many people nowadays, it was viewed as cutting-edge technology during 1912. 4. Ruth Becker. Ruth Becker was only 12 years old when she joined RMS Titanic on her maiden voyage, making her one of the youngest passengers aboard the ship. She was traveling with her mother, Nellie, and her brother, Richard, who had fallen ill, as well as her younger sister. To increase Richard's chances of survival, the family were advised to travel to Benton Harbor, Michigan, to seek medical treatment. Her father, Alan Oliver Becker, however, remained in her hometown of Guntur, India, with plans to join them at a later date. While the Becker family were captivated by the beauty of the ship, their journey took a turn for the worst when it struck an iceberg on April 14. Consequently, Ruth's mother and her two youngest children entered Lifeboat 11. However, there was no seat left for Ruth. However, she soon entered Lifeboat 13. However, as the lifeboat was lowered, it was nearly crushed by Lifeboat 15, which was being lowered into the ocean at an alarming rate. Fortunately, a member of the crew cut Lifeboat 13's ropes, which allowed it to escape Lifeboat 15 in time. Ruth was eventually rescued from the lifeboat by RMS Carpathia and, after many anxious hours, she was reunited with her mother and siblings. 3. Edward and Ethel Bean. Following RMS Titanic's collision with an iceberg, women and children were escorted into lifeboats to escape the sinking vessel. Wives were reluctantly pulled away from their husbands, while children were forced to wave goodbye to their fathers, who they never saw again. However, Edward and Ethel Bean managed to survive one of the worst maritime disasters in history. The couple were honeymooning on RMS Titanic, but were torn apart when Ethel was forced to leave her new husband on the ship and enter a lifeboat. Similar to many men on the liner, Edward had no choice but to jump overboard, and he swam in the icy cold ocean until he was fortunately picked up by a lifeboat. However, many men were not so lucky and tragically succumbed to hypothermia. Despite the odds against them, Edward and Ethel were reunited on the rescue ship, RMS Carpathia. 2. The Titanic waifs. When women and children were instructed to enter a lifeboat on April 15, 1912, a father placed his two young sons into Collapsible D, which was the last lifeboat lowered into the water. The curly-haired boys were then cared for by 22-year-old Mary Kelly from Castlepoyard, Ireland, who comforted them with song. When the French boys arrived at New York after being rescued by RMS Carpathia, their identities were unknown. Various newspapers then published stories about the orphans to appeal to any family they might have in France or another country, and they were referred to as the Titanic waifs by the press. Soon after, Marcelle Navratil came forward as the mother of 3-year-old Michel and 2-year-old Edmond Roger. It turns out their father, Michel Navratil, had kidnapped his children from the south of France and boarded the vessel under the pseudonym of Louis Hoffman. While he lost his life in the sinking, the boys were transported back to France with their mother. 1. William Carter II. The Carter family boarded RMS Titanic as first-class passengers and were returning to Rhode Island after a trip to Europe. They were also traveling with their pet dog, as well as their servants, Alexander Cairns and Augusta Sarapla. When women and children were escorted into lifeboats on the night of the sinking, the Carter family waited their turn before being instructed to enter Lifeboat 4. However, 11-year-old William Carter II was stopped from doing so by Second Officer Charles Lightoller, as he was too old to enter. Not willing to leave her young son behind on the sinking ship, William's mother, Lucille, reportedly removed her hat and placed it on top of William's head to disguise him as a girl and ensure his survival. Despite weeping at the thought of leaving his dog behind, William escaped the ill-fated liner with his mother and sisters, and he lived to the grand age of 84 years old.